Hello, and welcome to Cutting Through. My name is Mitchell Plitnick. Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Marco Rubio was asked why the United States chose this particular time to launch an attack on Iran. There are good reasons to ask that question, which we'll get to in a moment, but let's first look at his response and what it caused. So when Rubio was asked that, he said, and I'm quoting here, one reason why is it was abundantly clear that if Iran came under attack by anyone, the United States or Israel or anyone, they were going to respond and respond against the United States. If we stood and waited for that attack to come first before we hit them, we would suffer much higher casualties. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that would precipitate an attack against American forces. So, I mean, I hope I don't have to explain the obvious fallacy in that line of reasoning. Essentially, Rubio is saying, my friend was going to punch you. There was no way for me to stop my friend from punching you, but I knew that when he punched you, you would punch me. So I'm going to punch you before anything else happens. Where's the logic in that? You want to try that with your second grade teacher? Because I don't think it'll work. But as absurd as that is, there was also an eagerness that Rubio's comments inspired. And that eagerness was people who are very, very married to the idea that Israel is the chief driver of U.S. foreign policy, at least in the Middle East. For some people, it goes beyond that as well. That theory extends to the idea that Israel actually diverts American policy against American interests and has essentially control over it. It is a very incorrect theory, to say the least. But those people heard this and rejoiced that Rubio had said the quiet part out loud and revealed that Israel drives U.S. policy. Look, this is a very vexing debate and one that has been engaged in a long time. Back almost 20 years ago, when John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt put out their paper before it was a book on the Israel lobby. I actually went on the radio in California, the local California radio station, and debated Stephen Walt on this. Did so respectfully because almost everybody else was calling him an anti-Semite, which I can tell you he is not. We have since become friends. We had a debate. We did not agree. We still don't agree. But I think also my debating, I like to think, helped Stephen think more about some of the loose ends in his theory. I think that theory has evolved, and he certainly gave me a lot of food for thought as well. But this debate doesn't usually happen that way, frankly. I think Stephen expressed to me not long after we did this. He expressed to me how appreciative he was by being able to have a calm, considered, thoughtful debate between two people who were showing each other respect on this subject. That's not usually how this happens. Usually, as with most things involving Israel and Palestine, each side is polarized, and one side calls the other, anti-Semite. Another side calls. The other side calls this one, fascist Zionists, and et cetera, and it goes on and devolves from there. So I'm not surprised that, and that's, certainly an extreme example, but I think that it has still, so much of the debate on this gets characterized that way that even if you try to engage in conscious and thoughtful debate, usually your interlocutor, chances are, is not going to do it. Is not going to cooperate, and so people, and even when they do, I think people get frustrated over years and years of these kinds of debates. So I'm not surprised that otherwise thoughtful people just jumped at this, but they are mistaken. They are, I believe, falling for a line of bullshit from Marco Rubio. Equally, some hours later, Donald Trump declared exactly the opposite. He was asked about Rubio's statements, and he said, no, no, the Israelis did not force our hand. If anything, I may have forced their hand, which is also nonsense. Okay. Believe me, nobody has to talk Benjamin Netanyahu into an attack on Iran. No one has to do that. I think that is very clear. No one has to convince Netanyahu to join the United States in an attack on Iran. So, you know, this is an even more, I think, transparent lie than the one Rubio was telling. But Rubio was telling a lie. Um, I think part of the reason that he did that, and if you watch the actual video, I'll try and find a link that I can put in the comment section or the description of this video. If you watch that, you can see that he wasn't prepared to answer the question. He kind of reaches for words. He seems to sort of stutter a little bit and try and think about what it is he wants to say. And Rubio is a better speaker than that. So I think if he was prepared, he would have been much more on the stick with his answer. And I think he wrote for one, and he was trying, I think, not to go out of his way to create this idea that Israel had forced the U.S. into a war on Iran, but rather was trying to come up with some way to justify the idea that there was an imminent threat, because that was his point, that the imminent threat was that Iran was going to retaliate against American forces. That point, that standalone point, that any attack was going to mean that Iran's response was going to be directed largely at American forces was certainly true, but obviously the logic fails, and I think so that Rubio was just trying to find some way to answer this in a way that described a legitimate reason for a preemptive strike and going and starting, knowingly starting a war. But the reality is, we know this attack was planned well in advance, and we know that, I mean, the U.S. had been building up its forces in the Gulf region for weeks. There have been reports that the decision to launch this attack was made several weeks ago. So again, not something that we can credibly believe was suddenly thrust upon an otherwise peace-loving United States. I think we can dismiss that idea out of hand. This was also not in any way the result of any Israel lobby. I mean, the lobby basically functions through Congress, that as any other lobby does. And there was no significant push from the Israel lobby, although they certainly support this. But their main powers in Congress, Congress played no role here. There was no real way for them to influence this decision. They certainly can't do it through the tool of any sort of electoral threat to Trump, since, well, I mean, even if Trump thinks he can run for a third term, this war is very unpopular. The recent poll from Reuters and Ipsos shows that just around 1 in 4 Americans support this war. So, this isn't a lobbying thing. Trump wanted this war. Okay. I mean, I think we need to understand that Trump has wanted this war from the get-go. He nearly provoked it in his first term with the assassination of General Soleimani, the head of the IRGC. It was only the fact that Iran showed restraint and Trump had a different cohort of people around him who were trying to talk some sense into his head, that prevented us from going to war then. Now he has a bunch of sycophants around him who are afraid to tell him. And I've heard this now from numerous people who have contacts deep inside the administration. They are afraid to tell him when they think he might be mistaken. They are afraid to disagree with him. They are afraid to offer him alternative scenarios from what he wants. Unless he asks, they are not offering. So that's the kind of White House he runs. And that is what leads him to take ill-advised actions like the one he has taken now in Iran. Trump wanted this, I believe, and again, there have been reports about this, because he wants his legacy to be the man who, after 40 plus years, finally eliminated the Islamic Republic of Iran. That's what he wants. this is supported by the fact that there's really no thought about what comes next. There's no real policy approach here on the part of the United States. It is very different for Israel. Israel is fine with the idea of a failed state in place of Iran that looks like Syria has over the past bunch of years, or that Libya has since the United States essentially tore its government down with, again, nothing to replace it. They're fine with that. That increases insecurity in the region, which is the lifeblood of Netanyahu and his right-wing cohort. So uh, there's clearly an interest there. I think Israel obviously also wouldn't mind if a pro-West, pro-Israel figure like Reza Pahlavi actually got installed in Iran, but that is not going to happen for a variety of reasons that I'm not going to go into right now. You can look at my upcoming article in Mondo Weiss about this, about the various lies that got us into this war, to see why Reza Pahlavi is not a legitimate option, despite what idiots like Van Jones say. Um, but there's a real discussion to have here about the role that Israel played in the decision to go to this war. I don't think there's any question that Netanyahu made a case to Trump and convinced him to do this. I don't think there's much doubt in my mind. He has allies. It's not just him. Marco Rubio was quite eager for this. You'll notice, I think, anyone who's paying attention to the various press statements and press conferences, you'll notice one man who is not very visible. We're seeing Marco Rubio, we're seeing Pete Hegseth. We are not seeing the vice president. We are not seeing J.D. Vance, who is known to be much more of an isolationist. He's certainly not going to oppose the president on this. And I'm sure if you asked him, he is absolutely going to give his full support and tell you all the reasons why this is such a brilliant move and Donald Trump is such a hero. But we're just not seeing him. And there's a reason for that. This is not what Vance is geared towards. Um, so, and he's probably happy to take a back seat because it means that he can, think about 2028 if Trump does not try to run for a third term, which is, of course, against the Constitution. He can think about his own position in trying to become the next president. By staying away from this and appealing and being able to say, look, I wasn't really part of that. And so you see, I really am the anti-war candidate, which will be its own absurdity, and we'll be going down a familiar road with that. But as much as Trump may want this war, for his own personal prestige and his own sense of why he should get the Congressional Medal of Honor, um, uh, it would be disingenuous to pretend that Israel doesn't play a significant role, not just in terms of Netanyahu convincing Trump to do this, but in terms of all of the United States policy calculations. This is why sort of these blanket statements of Israel is not the motivating force behind U.S. foreign policy, or the U.S. is controlled essentially by Israel, are both equally wrong. Israel is a factor. It's a political factor. We know that it has a lot of allies in Congress that are facilitated by AIPAC and other powerful lobbying groups like CUFI, Christians United for Israel. Those are important players on Capitol Hill, let me tell you. So that's no small thing, and that does play a part in the thinking of most policymakers. It plays less of a part for Trump because Trump just doesn't care about these things. But there's more to it than that. Israel is seen as America's agent in the Middle East, rightly or wrongly. We can talk about how Israel undermines American policy goals, and not a few generals have come out and made that statement, including some who are friendly with Trump, like David Petraeus made such a statement in the past. There's no doubt that Israel does not always act in a way that promotes certainly not American interests. But as a general rule, when the United States puts their foot down and says, Israel, you're going to stop doing this, or you are going to do that, Israel is forced to comply because they are entirely dependent, no matter what they like to say, on the United States. Evidence of that was quite clear last June when Israel had gotten itself an excuse to launch what he called a retaliatory strike on Iran that was huge. They were going to launch a major attack on Iran last June. This is after the 12-day war. And Donald Trump did not want them to do that. And he called Netanyahu and said, "You're going to turn those planes around and bring them back." And Netanyahu turned those planes around and brought them back. Believe me, not something he wanted to do. It did not make him look good to his voter base in Israel, and certainly isn't something he wanted. Attacks on Iran and war with Iran is something Netanyahu has been after, as I said, for 4 decades. So don't tell me that Israel forces the United States into anything. It simply isn't true. At the same time, we should not ignore the role Israel plays both in politics, um, and that is not insignificant, although it's also very much changing. Money and spurious charges of anti-Semitism can only take you so far when people really do not like the product you're selling, and the product you're selling, in this case, is a genocidal and apartheid state. So we are seeing a real shift in Israel's role in American politics, but it's still there. It's still important. It still matters. And in terms of foreign policy planning, geostrategic planning, Israel is still a key player in how the United States approaches the Middle East and the strategic questions there. So there is a part that is clearly there is a part of American planning and foreign policy planning and strategic planning that does include what's best for Israel. That can at times bleed into ideological leanings. Trump promotes what's best for Israel insofar as he thinks it's best for him. Joe Biden promoted what was best for Israel because he was ideologically committed to Israel as much as many Christians and also Jews are equally fanatically committed to the interests of Israel. Not just in the United States, but elsewhere. Never forget that the Zionist movement actually sprung out of Christian dispensationalist theology back in the 19th century, and that's also once Jewish Zionism arose out of that. It was the Christian dispensationalists, often people who very much hated Jews, who were the supporters of the early Zionist movement, oftentimes because they saw it as a way to hopefully get Jews out of Europe and all into Palestine. All right, I'm not trying to get into big history here, but there needs to be nuance when you're considering, how policy is made. I've been working, my degree is in public policy. I've been working on policy for damn near 30 years now. And it's never as straightforward as you see it in your favorite podcast, most news articles, etc. It isn't that simple a question. And needs to be approached with more nuance than just saying, the U.S. just pursues its own interests, and if they happen to coincide with what Israel wants, then that's just because that happens very often, or because Israel is going along with the U.S. or et cetera, or whatever you want to say. It is not as simple as that, nor is it as simple as saying Israel has dominated U.S. foreign policy. That's just not true. As you can easily see in other areas of the world and how the United States has behaved in Latin America, in Africa, in Southeast Asia. I mean, the list is endless of places where no Israel lobby was required for the United States to pursue brutal and horrendous policies. So, I think it's important when somebody like Marco Rubio says something stupid like this to counter it with some thoughtful nuance, but also not to just blatantly disagree and say, hey, oh no, Israel has, it's terrible to say that Israel has effect. I mean, the idea that it's terrible to say that the Israel lobby has an effect on American policy implies that this lobbying organization that channels millions and millions of dollars into political campaigns, spends millions and millions of dollars on lobbying, is doing it for no reason. I mean, that's as absurd as saying the Jews control America. So, there needs to be nuance in the conversation. And that means when somebody like Marco Rubio says something like what he said, it needs to be responded to in a thoughtful manner. And so that's what I hope I've done here. There's going to be a lot more. I'm really busy this week on a number of projects regarding the Iran war, several articles. I've been doing a bunch of media hits. So there'll be a lot more at cutting through, obviously, on the war on Iran, the illegal, immoral, and stupid war on Iran. So if you subscribe to the Cutting Through newsletter, you can find a lot more of my work on this. And there will be more videos as I can get to them. And so hopefully you'll be tuning into those soon.